The house by the sea felt strangely silent that afternoon. The wind blew through the curtains, carrying the scent of salt and the sound of waves crashing against the cliffside. I stepped inside. My voice cut through the stillness, soft yet sharp as a knife. Have you ever wondered, Mom, why in every single family picture I'm always the one standing in the back? The room fell absolutely silent. Light streamed through the window, illuminating the wall where a single empty frame hung alone. My mother didn't look at me. She just wiped dust off the glass, her tone flat, as if speaking about a stranger. That frame is reserved for Allison's wedding photo. I gave a bitter laugh. And what about me, Mom? You? She finally looked up. You don't need a frame to be remembered. You're used to standing in the back, aren't you? The air grew thick and heavy. I could clearly hear the clock ticking, cold and steady. Outside, the waves slammed against the rocks, spraying white foam like a silent explosion. I moved closer, the slanting light falling across my face. It was cold, hazy, like a wound that hadn't closed. No, Mom, I said quietly, my voice trembling but firm. I'm not standing in the back anymore. Not starting now. I turned and walked away, leaving behind the sound of the waves and the light reflecting off the empty frame. At that moment, I didn't know. That exact instant had just marked the beginning of my 3-year journey. From a person erased from the picture frame to a photographer who would force the world to look again at what they had chosen to forget. This is a story about presence, about women who were once considered invisible, and about how they rewrote the light of their own lives. If you've ever had to stay silent to be accepted, then please subscribe, because this story is for you, the one learning to step out of the shadow and finally be seen. It had been 3 years since I was last back at the old house, a place once loud with the sound of waves and the smell of salt clinging to every memory. The coastal road was still narrow, the 2 rows of old pine trees leaning in the wind. The white-painted gate was speckled with rust. I touched the railing, and the cold metal sent a chill through me. In that instant, I remembered the summers I had spent standing right here, waiting for Dad's boat to return, or hearing Mom call out, "Get inside, Clara, it's getting dark." Now there was only the smell of salt, paint, and damp wind seeping through the gaps in the old wood, quiet as the breath of an aging house. I took a deep breath and then pushed the door open. The smell of new wood hit me. Mom still had her habit of repainting the walls for every special occasion. Inside, the lights were bright, frames hung perfectly straight on the wall, and in the middle of the room, my mother was hanging photos for Allison's exhibition. She wore a crisp white shirt and thin cotton gloves, meticulously adjusting every corner of the prints. The light reflected off the polished wooden frames, making the space look like a small gallery. I paused at the doorway, not wanting to startle her. Only the sound of the wind from the door crack and the faint rustle of photo paper broke the silence. I looked around. Everything was as it had been: the beige sofa, the blue ceramic vase on the table, the rug I once spilled paint on as a child. Only the walls were different. They used to display my photographs: the sea in winter, Dad in his boat, a seagull with a broken wing. Now, all of it was gone. She turned around when she noticed me standing there. "You're back?" Mom's voice was even, neither high nor low. I nodded. The boat arrived earlier than expected. She offered a fleeting smile and then returned to her work. "I want to finish everything today. Allison has her private exhibition this weekend, and the press will be here." I offered a quiet, trying to keep my voice steady. I walked around the room, my gaze stopping at an empty frame in the middle of the floor, much larger than the rest. It wasn't hung, only leaned against the wall. Though it held no picture, the glass surface sparkled brightly. Next to it was a soft cleaning cloth. Mom was wiping it down carefully, each movement slow, painstaking. as if the object was more precious than anything else in the room. I knelt down, my finger tracing the edge of the frame. "Whose frame is this, Mom?" She looked up, her eyes never leaving the wood. "That frame is reserved for Allison's wedding photograph." Her voice was soft yet clear, a hint of pride in it, as if she were talking about a major family achievement. I was silent for a few seconds, then simply smiled. "I see." There was nothing more to say. In that moment, I suddenly felt the distance between my mother and me wasn't measured by the years I'd been away, but by the picture frames hung on the wall. I had thought that when I returned, I would at least have a small place in this house. But now, I was only standing outside the light of those photographs, and I felt myself fading in her eyes. Mom carefully placed the cloth on the table, admired the empty frame one last time before gathering her tools. She didn't realize I was still watching. She simply said, her voice matter-of-fact, "Allison deserves a special place." I nodded slightly, offering no argument. Perhaps she was right. Allison was always the special one. The one whose name was called at every meal. The one praised in articles. The one everyone waited for to gather the whole family. I stood silently for a long time, not out of jealousy, but because in this room filled with images, not a single one was mine. I took a step back, looking around, trying to find something that still held the old breath. But the house seemed to have been rearranged to erase every trace of me. Neat, bright, nothing superfluous. I gave a small, quiet laugh, unsure if it was bitter or sad. "This place looks so different," I said, my voice low. Mom replied without turning around. "Different for the better, right?" I didn't answer. I just looked at the empty frame leaning against the wall. It stood there, perfect and ready, waiting for something I didn't belong to. A single ray of light shone through the empty frame, striking my face, a cold, thin sliver of light, like a blade. That light cut across the quiet room, illuminating every dust particle suspended in the air. I blinked softly. It seemed as though the entire house was looking at me through that frame, not with eyes, but with an emptiness. The sea wind whistled through the crack in the door, and the thin curtain swayed, creating a faint sound, like the sigh of someone held silent for too long. I stood there, motionless, letting the wind blow through my hair, carrying the scent of salt and dampness. A cold sensation spread down my spine, both real and distant. I remembered the day I left. It was a similar afternoon, the light stabbing diagonally through the window, shining on my mother's face, preventing her from seeing me clearly. All I wanted then was to escape every expectation, every comparison. I thought going far away would bring me peace. But 3 years later, returning, the cold spot was still in the exact same place, in my heart, and in this light. I took half a step back, looking at the empty frame against the wall. The light still shone through, reflecting my silhouette on the glass surface. It wasn't clear, just a faint shadow between the layers of light and dark. I wondered, if I disappeared, would anyone notice? Or would this house remain just as bright, only lacking a shadow that no one paid attention to anyway? I moved closer, sat down, and brought my eyes level with the frame's edge. The wood was smooth, newly painted, and faintly fragrant. Mom must have chosen the best for Allison. I looked for a long time, as if, just by staring long enough, I would see a different version of myself inside, the person Mom had once hoped I would become. A moment later, I heard my own voice come out, small and hoarse. "One day, I will fill this empty space." It wasn't a promise, nor a challenge, just a small voice, more like a breath. I touched my finger to the transparent glass. The cool sensation ran through my fingertip, but underneath, it was still an empty space. No image, no person, just light drifting through. Sometimes, the empty space doesn't need anyone to create it. It just exists, as a part of life. But sometimes, we are the ones who keep it empty, afraid that if we fill it, we'll have nowhere left to return. I looked around and realized Mom had left the room. Only the steady ticking of the clock remained, and the sound of the waves from offshore, mixing with the suppressed voice in my heart. The two sounds blended, like a piece of music I used to hear as a child, steady, deep, and full of longing. I leaned my back against the wall, letting the light slide across my cheek. The feeling made me want to cry and smile at the same time. Perhaps soon, Allison's wedding photo would be hung in this frame, right in the center of the wall, bathed in the morning light, and everyone who walked into the house would say, "How beautiful." No one would know that once another person had stood here, looking into that light, in silence, and dreamed of being in the frame herself. I stood up, gently closing the window to stop the wind from gusting in. The sound of the waves softened, like someone tired after a long day. In the distance, a ship's horn sounded a long blast, then dissolved into the gray air. On the table, the cleaning cloth my mother had left was still folded. I picked it up, folding it neatly. A small action, yet it softened my heart. Perhaps, no matter how many years passed, the daughter in me still wanted to be praised by my mother just once, even if only for folding a cloth correctly. I put the cloth down and walked out onto the porch. The afternoon air had thickened, carrying the mist of the sea. I heard the door gently hitting the wall, the wind rustling through the old floorboards. Every sound was a reminder. I was truly here, in the house I once called mine, but which now only held the pictures of others. I raised my head, looking out at the horizon. The last light of the day spread thinly over the ocean surface, hazy and warm, like a ribbon someone had forgotten. I inhaled deeply, letting the scent of the sea fill my chest. A smile flitted across my lips, neither sad nor peaceful. "Someday," I whispered, almost soundlessly, "I'll find my own frame." The waves crashed against the shore again, gentle and persistent. It no longer sounded like a sigh, but like an answer, distant but true. The first evening back, the family meal took place in the old kitchen that my mother had kept exactly as it was since Dad built the house. The ceiling light was a soft yellow, shining on the wooden table with its faint scratches. The smell of grilled fish, lemon, and a subtle hint of sea salt. It was all so familiar that it felt strange. Mom sat at the head of the table, facing me, positioned between two men, Dad on one side and the empty chair that used to be Allison sitting between them like a dividing line. From the moment she sat down, she talked incessantly. The sole subject was Allison, the exhibition, the article in the art magazine, the critics' praise. And she's about to be a photo consultant for a project in San Francisco. The papers published her picture. It's beautiful. I nodded, offering just enough of a smile not to seem indifferent. On the table, my cup of tea slowly cooled, the surface of the water flat as a mirror. I stirred it lightly, listening to the sound of the spoon hitting the porcelain, small, steady, and cold. I wasn't really thirsty. I just needed something to keep my hands busy, so I didn't have to respond every time Mom mentioned "Dear Allison," with that tone that was both proud and slightly pitying toward the remaining person. "You two still keep in touch?" she asked. "Occasionally," I said, still looking into my tea. "She's busy, but she still remembers to send cards for every occasion. She's so thoughtful." I gave a faint laugh. "I know." A brief silence passed, and then she continued talking about the engagement party, about the interview in the Portland Daily. As for me, All I heard was the sound of the waves echoing somewhere in my head. The meal continued like a ritual, scooping, picking up food, asking, telling. Every one of Mom's sentences was a thread, tightly stitching the old memories onto the present, making me feel suffocated. Then she put down her chopsticks, looked at me, her gaze softening slightly. "You had potential," she said, "but you chose a strange path." I looked up, meeting her eyes. There was no anger there, only regret, like someone looking at a beautiful painting that was hung crookedly. "I just chose where my light could shine," I said softly. The kitchen suddenly grew quiet. The clock hand moved slowly. The distant sound of waves echoed. Mom was silent, her lips pressed together. I knew she didn't understand. To her, light was something that came from galleries, from people shaking hands, from magazines and praise. To me, light was the way it fell on the ocean every morning when no one was watching. Mom sighed, then picked up her glass of water. "Maybe," she said, "but that kind of light won't help you make a living." I intended to reply, but then stopped. Not because of fear, but because I understood that any rebuttal would be pointless. Between us, the difference wasn't in our careers, but in the way we saw the world. A moment later, Dad offered a strained smile, the kind of smile I was familiar with when he wanted to cut the tension. He spooned some soup, his voice gentle. "Are you still using the old camera?" I nodded. "Still the same, but the lens is getting weak now." "I still remember when you took that picture of the wave," he said, "the one with 2 seagulls flying against the wind. It was beautiful." Mom cut him off, her voice quick. "That picture is gone. The film was flawed, completely overexposed." Dad was about to say something more, but stopped. He looked down at his plate, stirred his soup, and took a deep breath. His silence sliced through the conversation, like a dull but heavy knife. No one spoke for a few minutes, only the sound of the clock and the wind seeping through the door crack. I could clearly hear my own heartbeat, slow and steady, as if trying to count the distance between the 3 people sitting around the table. I put down my spoon and looked up at the window. The sky was darkening, the sea outside covered in mist. In the glass, I saw my reflection, blurred in the yellow light, exactly like an old photograph with a lighting flaw. The meal continued, but the conversation didn't. We just ate, in the familiar silence of a family that knew how to avoid confrontation. Each person had a separate world, and it seemed no one was truly at the table together. I looked over at Dad. He was still focused on his food, but the hand holding the spoon trembled slightly. I knew that in his silence, he was trying to preserve the peace, a peace as fragile as the water surface in the cup of tea I had just stirred. After dinner, I helped Mom clear the dishes. Neither of us spoke. There was only the sound of running water and the wind whistling through the window crack. Once everything was rearranged exactly the way she wanted, I left the kitchen and walked down the hallway leading to the gallery room, the room where I had grown up. The light cast from the hallway created a long strip of light on the wooden floor. Inside, the scent of varnish, pine wood, and paper print dust mingled. I stood at the doorway, not turning on the light. That dim light was enough to realize everything had changed. On the wall, dozens of old family photos were neatly arranged. Mom and Dad's wedding, Allison's birthdays, vacations by the sea. I moved closer, my eyes stopping at one picture of the whole family. 3 people sitting on a wooden bench. I was standing behind, my hand on Allison's shoulder. But in that picture, my face was blurred by glare, as if the midday sun that year had erased half of my frame. Everything else was sharp, Allison's white bow, the bracelet Mom was wearing, Dad's gentle smile. Only I was faint, dissolving into the bright background. I felt my heart constrict. That was the most cruel kind of light, the light that made a person vanish from their own memory. I gently touched the photograph, my finger trembling slightly on the cool glass. "Even memory erases me," I whispered. My voice dissolved into the space, so thin that I wasn't sure if I had actually spoken or just thought it in my head. I took a step back, looking at the other frames. Allison was everywhere, the girl with bright eyes and a smile that never shied away from the camera. I was the one who took most of these photos, but no one remembered that. When people look at a photo, they only remember the person in the frame, not the person holding the camera. I flipped through a few other prints on the table, mostly preparations for the new exhibition. Some were pictures of the sea in the morning, the sun stark white, the boundary between sky and water so vague it was undefined. Mom always said she liked that kind of light, the kind of light that eliminated everything superfluous. I sat down on a chair next to the table and slipped my hand into my jacket pocket. My fingertip touched a small, hard object. When I pulled it out, I saw it was an old film negative I had brought from my apartment in Portland. It had been in my pocket the entire train ride home. I had forgotten its existence until now. I turned it gently in my hand. The film was fragile, its edges already cracked. Just a little force. Snap. The break was quiet as the sigh of a memory. The old negative cracked softly, splitting in two, the light in the room reflecting off the broken surface, showing a faint silver streak before fading. I held my breath, watching it lie still in my palm, a fragment of memory that could no longer hold any image. I closed my hand, a cold sensation spreading from my palm, as if I had just dropped something irreplaceable. Perhaps everything that once belonged to me, this house, the memory, the light, had shattered in the same way, silently and without tears. I placed the two pieces of film on the table and stood up. The sea wind blew through the curtain again, stronger this time, carrying the taste of salt and mist. The curtain billowed up, then settled down slowly, like the breathing of someone trying to hide their pain. The space was cold and vast. I crossed my arms, looking out the window. Outside, the ocean's surface was dark, faintly illuminated by the moonlight. The sound of the waves was steady, neither violent nor gentle, just the sound of an unhealed wound. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind blowing through my hair, through the gap in my clothes. In that moment, I clearly felt the emptiness between me and the others in the house. That emptiness wasn't because they didn't love me, but because they didn't know how much it hurt to be erased from the frame. I opened my eyes, looking at the family photo one more time. The light from outside streamed in, covering the glass with a cold silver layer. In it, I saw my own face reflected, faint, but this time, the light didn't cover me. It just stood beside me, like a promise that I was still here, perhaps blurred, but real. Outside, the waves crashed steadily. The wind blew through the door crack, gently pulling the curtain, like someone's hand lightly touching my shoulder. I stood still, letting that silence wash over me, no longer resisting, no longer trying to disappear. Nights at the house by the sea were always defined by the wind. That sound would seep through every crack, blowing into every sleep, every silent pause of the house. I was sitting in my old room, the yellow desk lamp casting an uneven light on the wall. Outside the door, the clock's ticking merged with the sound of the waves, slow, steady, like the deep breathing of a house accustomed to silence. While sorting through my camera gear and a pile of old film negatives, I suddenly heard my mother talking on the phone in the living room. Her voice was low but distinct, because the house was so quiet that even the wind could be heard. "Yes, there are enough seats already. No, we don't need any more. She understands." I froze. Those 2 words, "she understands," stabbed directly into my ear. She spoke a few more sentences, a slight laugh, and then the sound of her footsteps faded. I sat still, motionless. Only those 2 words echoed in my mind, like a curse. She understands. The phrase seemed harmless, but in this house, it was always synonymous with no need to say more. When Allison was chosen to represent the gallery, Mom said, "You understand." When I wasn't invited to the Christmas party that year, it was also, "You understand." Now, she was probably using it to talk about something else, and I, as always, was excluded from the list without even needing notification. I turned off the desk lamp and stepped into the hallway. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting a cold streak of light onto the floor. From the living room, my mother's voice still echoed, fading away until it fell silent as she went upstairs. I stood motionless in the hallway, listening to my own heartbeat. Behind me, I heard the faint sound of Dad's door opening. He stood there, in the dark, his gray sweater slightly creased at the wrists. The hallway light illuminated one side of his face, the other half submerged in shadow. I saw him attempt to speak. His lips parted, his hand starting to lift, but then he drew it back. We looked at each other for a few seconds. He seemed to want to step forward but stopped, offering only a soft sigh. The sound was quiet but heavy. His shadow was imprinted on the wall, thin as smoke, blurring slightly whenever the wind passed through. "Dad," I started to speak, but the words caught in my throat. He simply nodded gently, then turned away. The sound of the door closing was slow, like a somber breath. I stood there in the faint light, listening to the wind whistling through the old window frame. The air smelled of salt and decaying wood. A sense of emptiness spread. Not anger, not self-pity, just an all-too-clear understanding. She understands. I whispered it back in my head, this time as if to check if it still hurt. And it did. A dull, quiet ache, not dramatic, just lingering like a thin thread tied around my heart. I returned to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. Outside, the waves crashed steadily, and I imagined the house breathing along with me. I opened my phone, looking at the empty inbox. No messages, no missed calls, no invitation whatsoever. Perhaps the event or party was genuinely full, and I, as always, was the one implicitly expected to understand. I turned on my camera, reviewing the test shots from the afternoon. The light was still off, the color of the sea still pale. I tried to adjust the angle, but nothing changed. Light never lies, it only reflects exactly what is present. A small moth circled the desk lamp, then flew into the glass shade. Snap. A heartbreakingly quiet sound. I watched it fall onto the table, its wings still faintly fluttering. A strange, fleeting moment, both small and painful. I thought, perhaps I was the same way, constantly flying toward the light, even though I knew I would burn. I turned off the light and lay down. Everything became quiet. Only the sound of the wind and my heartbeat remained. I looked up at the ceiling, seeing the moonlight shine through the window, falling precisely on the area of the wall where Allison's photograph hung. That silver light lay still, cold and perfect, just the way Mom liked it. I spoke softly to myself, my voice blending into my breath. Maybe I understand too. Outside, the waves still pounded the shore, slow as a late reply. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, where the night air was thick with mist. The sea breeze whipped lightly against my face, carrying the salty taste and the steady sound of waves beneath the rocks. The moon hung low, its light falling on the rusty railing, on the old eaves, and on my cold hands. I stood still, no longer thinking, no longer trying to calm myself. I just let the wind pass through me. Something shifted in my chest, both painful and hollow. I really do understand. All too well, I said softly, my voice almost dissolving into the wind. I understood that in this house, love always came with conditions. I understood that some seats would never be reserved for me, no matter how early or late I returned. And I understood that sometimes people don't actively push you away. They simply don't remember you were ever there. The waves continued to crash against the shore, rhythmic as the ocean's breathing. In the darkness, I felt both small and free. There was nothing left to lose, so the wind blowing past me felt lighter. I turned back inside, grabbed the camera from the table, and returned to the porch. In front of me, the living room window reflected the empty frame my mother had left there since the afternoon. The yellow light inside the house shone through the glass, creating a shimmering halo suspended in the darkness. I raised the camera, adjusting the focus. My hands were slightly shaking. I pressed the shutter. Click. The small sound echoed, enough to make my heart flutter. A photo of no one, only light. No faces, no movement. Just the empty space where the lamplight and the wooden frame met, where one person once thought they would be seen. I checked the screen. The light in the photo was blurred, imperfect, but there was something undeniably real about it, a reality I had never dared to name. Absence. I lowered the camera, letting my hands rest on the railing. The wind picked up again, sticking my hair to my face, but I didn't wipe it away. In that frame, I saw my own absence. Not the tragic disappearance you see in films, but a very real kind of absence, still bright and unnoticed, like a shadow consumed by the light, but still leaving a trace of warmth somewhere in the air. I looked out at the sea. The water was dark, but under the moonlight, each wave carried a thin silver ribbon. They came, dissolved, and came again, not demanding to be seen, only needing to touch the shore once more. I thought about Allison, about Mom, about the years I'd been gone. Perhaps I used to be angry about being forgotten, but now, amidst the wind and the waves, I realized being forgotten is sometimes the only way to look back at yourself, unfiltered by anyone else's frame. I picked up the camera one last time and photographed the sky. No focus, no light adjustment. I just wanted to record the moment I was still here, breathing, standing in that vast, empty space. I placed the camera on the wooden table on the porch, looking out into the distance. The horizon was almost dissolving into the sea, leaving only a faint strip of light between the sky and the water. Everything was quiet, only the sound of the waves mingling with my own breath. A house, an empty frame, a photo of no one. Perhaps this was the beginning of something I hadn't yet named, something that starts when there is nothing left to prove but quiet existence. I leaned my shoulder against the porch column, closing my eyes. The wind was cold, but my heart no longer trembled. In my mind, the two words "she understands" slowly vanished, like a wave dissolving into the night. Inside the house, the light was still on, but it was no longer harsh. Outside, my shadow stretched across the sand, fading, and then merging into the thin sliver of light reflected from the window. And in that moment, I knew I had just taken the most important photograph. Not a beautiful picture, but a true one. It was early morning. The sky hadn't yet brightened, only a faint silver band stretched across the horizon. I put on a thick sweater and carried the wooden frame out to the beach. A light drizzle had fallen overnight, so the sand was damp and the smell of salt was stronger than usual. Every step left a distinct footprint that the small waves soon erased. In the distance, the horizon was swallowed by a pervasive, murky fog, so dense and white that the water surface was terrifyingly still. The entire space seemed to hold its breath. No birds, no wind. The only sounds were my shoes crunching on the wet sand and the rhythm of the waves receding. Slow, patient. I stopped at the place where I had taken the first photograph of my life, where Allison once sat smiling, her hair damp with dew. Now, there was only the sea, the sand, and me. I set the wooden frame down in the sand, tilting it slightly so it wouldn't fall. It was heavier and larger than I remembered, the edges of the wood damp and darkened after a night of sea wind. I stepped back a few paces, observing. The faint light of dawn filtered through the frame, dividing the sky and the water, creating a perfect void. That void was breathtakingly beautiful. I opened my camera, attached the tripod, and adjusted the lens angle. In the viewfinder, the sea opened up like a giant mirror, colorless, boundless. I stood behind the lens, my hands cold but steady. I took a deep breath, clearly hearing my own heart beat. Click. The click sounded like a heartbeat, a small sound, yet it reverberated into the surrounding emptiness, making everything silent for a second. I looked at the preview screen and saw something strange. In the photo, there was a woman standing between the empty frame and the blue sea. I twitched my hand. No, it wasn't someone else. It was me, my reflection, caught in the protective lens glass. A faint, dark streak, blending between the sky and the water. It wasn't sharp, just enough to recognize the standing figure. The sight stunned me. Between the vast ocean and the empty frame, that figure was so small it looked about to dissolve. But it was there, real, though fragile. I knelt down, adjusted the frame to the right angle, and pressed the shutter again. Click. The sound of the camera merged with the sound of the waves, creating a dual rhythm, heart and sea, person and void. I stepped closer to the frame, looking through it. The sea was still calm, but the light was beginning to shift. From the east, the first ray of light of the new day slipped through the clouds, touched the water surface, and reflected onto the frame like a thin, golden thread. I inhaled, slow and deep. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing outside the frame. I was in it. Not with my face, but with my presence. A breeze began to stir, light, but enough to make my hair fly. The smell of salt mixed with damp wood and breath. I didn't think, didn't interpret. I just let the light do its part. The image of the photos Mom used to hang flashed through my mind. Everything polished, perfect, meticulously arranged. But this photo, it wasn't perfect at all. The light was uneven, the horizon line slightly tilted, and the wind made the frame wobble. Yet in that imperfection, there was something truthful, a truth I had spent years searching for in pictures that were too orderly. I placed the camera on the sand, standing for a long time just looking at the empty frame. The light grew clearer, the sky opening into a silvery gray color. The sea began to change from black to blue. I found myself smiling, not out of happiness, but from the realization. Sometimes, just the light is enough to make everything different. A seagull glided past, the sound of its wings cutting through the air, ringing clearly in the mist. I watched it, then turned back to the frame. The first light of day was now fully contained within it, as if the sea and sky had made an appointment at that exact point. I raised the camera one last time, adjusting the focus very slowly. "All right," I whispered. "This one's for me." Click. The camera sound rang out again, full, sharp, and full of life. I closed the lens cap, holding the camera in my hand, and felt as if I had just secured a piece of my own soul, the part I long thought had been erased from every photograph. I bent down to pick up the camera, wiping the moisture off the lens. When I looked up, the sunrise light shone directly on me, both cold and warm. It wasn't the brilliant light of midday, but soft, clear, like a silent comfort. The thin rays of light slanted through the empty frame, filling the space between me and the sea, and then stopped, on the wet sand. I stood still, feeling as if someone had just placed a hand on my shoulder, not to stop me, but to remind me that I was still here. Everything around me brightened, the water surface, the wooden frame, my sand-covered shoes, even the strands of hair tangled by the wind. Each thing had its own place, and for the first time, I felt present, not in anyone's eyes, not in someone else's frame, but in this very moment. I raised the camera and took another shot. On the screen, the light was spread out and blurred, erasing the boundary between me and the sea. There was no distinction between person and water, only the breath of the early morning, and the colors of gold touching blue, precarious, yet beautiful. I gave a faint laugh, then whispered into the wind, "If no one invites me, I will show up myself." My voice was so small, it was almost swallowed by the sound, but the waves seemed to hear it. Small ripples brushed the shore, gently, like an answer. I looked down and saw my footprints stretching out on the sand, fading with every incoming wave. The cold water touched my ankles, then retreated, leaving behind shiny trails. The responding waves washed away my footprints, little by little, until the sand's surface was flat, as if no one had ever passed through. I didn't move. I let the water retreat and then return, letting it wash away the remnants of the past clinging to my heels. With every touch of the wave, I felt lighter, as if the invisible wall around my chest was slowly dissolving. The wind changed direction. I turned toward the sun, which was steadily climbing higher. A golden band of light covered the water surface, so dazzling I had to squint. In a flash, I saw everything sparkle. The wooden frame, the sea, the sky, all of them flaring up with a vibrant light, as if breathing. I took one more picture, then placed the camera on the sand. I didn't need to check it again. I knew that photo wouldn't be perfect. The light was off, the lens was misty, but I didn't care. The important thing was that I was present in it, even if only a blurred shadow in the early mist. A strong gust of wind blew through. A strand of hair caught in my mouth and I laughed, the salty taste of the sea touching my tongue. I heard the waves growing louder, as if the ocean wanted to say something I was finally ready to hear. I inhaled deeply. The air was cold but clear. I could smell the seaweed, the salt, the old paint from the wooden frame, all blending together, creating a flavor that belonged only here, only in this kind of early morning. I stepped up to the higher bank of sand and turned back. The wooden frame was still there, slightly tilted, glowing in the sunlight like a door opening in mid-air. I wondered, did every empty frame simply wait for someone brave enough to stand in the middle of it, so it would no longer be a void? I closed my eyes, letting the sun touch my face. The wind gently pushed me backward, and in that moment I saw it more clearly than ever. No one needed to acknowledge me. No one needed to give permission. I still existed. In the distance, the sun was fully up, the horizon dividing the sea and sky with a brilliant golden streak. The waves were still steady, like the old, persistent beat of time. But to me, it sounded different. No longer sad, but like a familiar piece of music being played again, slow, deep, and true. I bent down to pick up the camera, the sand crunching between my fingers. I looked through the lens one last time. Light flooded the frame, so vibrant it was impossible to distinguish where the end was, or where the beginning lay. I pressed the shutter one more time. Click. The sound rang out, soft and clear. I smiled, knowing that this time the light in the frame belonged to me. I left the coastal town on a Monday morning. The road to the station was covered in mist, the 2 rows of pine trees casting dappled shadows onto the pavement. As the train pulled away, the sea receded behind me, slowly, gently, as if watching me leave without calling me back. I sat by the window, clutching the canvas bag holding the wooden frame, my heart heavy but calm. Some journeys are returns to find an answer, and some journeys are departures to rewrite the question. 3 hours later, the train stopped in Portland. The city was as noisy as ever, filled with the sounds of traffic, the smell of roasted coffee and exhaust fumes. I went back to my small third-floor apartment in the old building, but instead of unpacking, I just stood by the window looking down at the street. The frantic rush of people, the constantly changing traffic lights, a rhythm of life I once chased but had forgotten how to catch up with. In the afternoon, I carried the wooden frame to Nora's small cafe, a friend from my old photography class. The cafe was on a corner of Lombard Street, exposed brick walls, large glass windows, with light pouring in slantwise at midday. Nora was wiping down a table when she saw me. "Clara, oh my God, it's been years!" She hugged me, the scent of coffee and burnt wood mingling. "I need a place to hang a few photos," I said. "Just temporarily." She smiled, her eyes lighting up. "There's a small corner here right by the window. Nobody sits there because the sun shines directly in. You can use it." I looked toward that corner. It was where the light fell the strongest, piercing through the transparent glass. The wall was bare, devoid of any decoration. "It's perfect," I said. No signs, no sponsors, no advertisements, just a white frame and the light. I didn't want to create an exhibition. I just wanted to hang what I had seen, small fragments of silence, of those forgotten from the picture frame. I began taping the photos to the wall. The first few were scenes of the sea at dawn, thin mist, a tilted horizon, faint light. Then came the frames from my mother's house, the empty dinner table, the chair pushed awkwardly aside, my half-lit face reflected in the mirror. Each picture was missing something, as if the light only dared to touch halfway. When Nora saw them, she was silent for a long time. "They're sad, but not tragic," she said. I smiled. It's the truth, so real that sometimes I couldn't bear it myself. On a small wooden board, I wrote in white paint, "Absent light. Ánh sáng bị lãng quên." The handwriting was slightly shaky because my hand was still cold, but I didn't fix it. I wanted it to have a small flaw, like my own life. By late afternoon, the cafe was quiet. Nora put on soft jazz. The aroma of coffee lingered, merging with the shimmering light from the window frame. I sat at a corner table, watching the photos tremble slightly from the air conditioner. A strange feeling settled in my heart, not exactly joy, but a definite sense of being alive. Nora placed an espresso in front of me. "Are you going to open a formal exhibition?" I shook my head. "No need. Anyone who stops by, if they pause long enough, they'll see it. That's enough." I looked up at the wall, where the photos were bathed in light. Half were in shadow, the other half brightly lit. Exactly the story I wanted to tell. I thought of my mother, the house by the sea, Allison. In my memory, everyone stood in their old, neatly arranged places. As for me, at this moment, I was in a small corner of a cafe, between the sound of the grinder and the sun pouring onto the wall. But strangely, I felt lighter here than ever before. No need to explain, no need to be invited, no need to be in the group shot, just a white frame and the light. I took a sip of coffee, the gentle bitterness spreading across my mouth. Through the glass, pedestrians rushed past, their shadows cutting across the light, touching the photos before disappearing. The sight made me smile. They didn't know they had just become a part of the small exhibition, and I, for the first time, was happy to have people pass through my frame. Nora stood beside me, arms crossed, looking at the photos I had just hung. The afternoon light from the window shone in, painting the walls with warm golden patches. She was silent for a long moment before speaking. "Are you sure? No one showing up can be quite damaging." I turned, seeing not doubt, but concern in her eyes. I understood that fear, the fear of someone who had witnessed too many people give up when no one saw them. I smiled, very faintly. "I've lived with emptiness my whole life, so it's fine." My voice was as normal as if I were talking about the weather, perhaps because I truly believed it. Absence no longer hurt me as it used to. It simply existed, like the space between two musical notes. And sometimes that very space is what gives the melody its soul. Nora didn't reply. She nodded slightly, then retreated to the counter. The espresso machine whirred to life, blending with the soft sound of the glass door vibrating in the breeze. I stood in that small room, looking around. Each photo seemed to be breathing. Night fell faster than I expected. The city outside was lit up, but inside the cafe, only a quiet yellow light was cast onto the wall. I turned off most of the lamps, leaving only a single ceiling bulb in the middle of the room. The light was soft, slanted, enough to illuminate the frames without making them overly bright. I pulled up a chair and sat in the middle of the room. The night before the opening, I was alone in the quiet room. No one was here, no conversations, no applause, just me, the photographs, and my own breath. Outside, traffic dwindled, and only the soft rain tapped on the window pane. I looked up at the first photograph, the empty frame reflecting the light from the counter. Beneath the glass, the lines were blurred, but I could still make out the small silhouette of the woman standing by the sea, facing the vast sky. I took that picture in Oregon, the morning mist so thick that the water surface vanished. I remembered that moment, the cold, the smell of salt, and the feeling that I had just been seen, even though no one was standing next to me. I stood up, turning off the last remaining light, leaving only the weak glow filtering in from the street. The light reflected in my eyes, quietly, proudly. I didn't think of the audience, the press, or my mother. I only thought of myself, the person who once trembled touching the empty frame in the house by the sea, the person who stood in the darkness, unsure if she was even there anymore. Now I knew. I was still here, clear, quiet, and strong enough to light my own way. I walked closer to the last photo, placing my hand on the edge of the frame. The wood was cold, smooth. I whispered, "Tomorrow's fine, whatever happens." There was no reply, only the sound of the rain intensifying against the glass roof. I smiled. A gentle draft slipped through the door crack, making the curtain sway slightly. The streaks of light on the wall moved, dancing across the photos like tiny breaths. I watched them, feeling as if every image was coming back to life, embracing its own light. I sat down, opening my notebook. On the first page, I wrote a small sentence. "You can't be forgotten if you never left yourself behind." I closed the notebook and took a deep breath. The night was still long, but my heart was no longer dark. Outside, the street grew quiet. The sound of the rain blended with a cafe's clock ticking, a slow, sure, and steady rhythm. I let myself listen until I couldn't distinguish between the rain and my own heartbeat. Tomorrow, maybe no one will come. But tonight, I am present, here, real, enough, and bright. The phone rang in the middle of the night, just as I had turned off the lights in the cafe. The light from the screen flashed onto the wall, pale and sickly. The name displayed, Mom. I looked at it for a few seconds, my heart sinking. Then I answered. "Are you coming to Allison's wedding?" My mother's voice was measured, as if she were asking about the weather. I was silent. Outside the glass door, the rain was still drizzling, the droplets reflecting the car headlights into long silver streaks. I could clearly hear her breathing on the other end, steady and deliberately controlled. "Do you want me to come, or do you just want me not to make a mess?" I asked, my voice slow and even. A silence drifted between us. Perhaps she was choosing her words, or perhaps remembering someone who once said something similar. I heard the rustle of cloth, the distinct tick of the wall clock in her house. "Don't ruin your sister's happiness." Just 5 words, neat, colder than the wind outside. I leaned back into the chair, the hand holding the phone relaxing. On the other end, there was no sound but my mother's breathing, a sound I knew by heart since childhood, whenever she tried to keep her voice calm after saying something hurtful. I chuckled, very faintly. "I'm used to the dark now, Mom." There was no reply. Perhaps she didn't know what to say, or maybe she thought I was angry. But in truth, I was just tired. I looked up at the ceiling, seeing the neon lights from the street outside cast patchy streaks of light through the glass. The room was empty, only the smell of cold coffee and the sound of rain falling. "Are you all right?" Finally she asked, her voice softer. I thought for a moment and said, "I'm all right, in my own way." A small, escaped her, so quiet I thought I'd misheard. Then the signal weakened, her voice fading amid soft static. I didn't say anything more, just held the phone to my ear, listening to the silence drag on. In that silence, I heard so much: weariness, regret, and even a certain love that didn't know how to speak itself. Then the line cut off. The screen went dark again. I put the phone down on the table, resting my forehead in my hand. It felt like falling into a dream without an end. The rain continued to fall outside, tapping steadily on the glass. Car headlights swept a band of light across the wall, then vanished. In my mind, my mother's voice still echoed, "Don't ruin your sister's happiness." Each word was like a tiny needle, not enough to make me cry, but enough to sting my heart. I remembered when I was a child, and Allison was chosen for the school's solo dance. Mom told me, "Don't stand too close to the stage, you distract her." When I won my first photography award at school, Mom just said, "Don't let your sister get jealous, bless her heart." And now, with Allison about to get married, I was being reminded of the same thing. Don't make your sister uncomfortable. I smiled. Perhaps I really was used to it now, used to standing outside the light, used to the darkness behind beautiful photographs. I turned off the desk lamp, sitting in the darkness, letting the rain continue to tap on the glass. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in my own heart. Outside, the wind changed direction. I heard the small cafe sign gently hit the wall. A real sound, yet it felt like an echo from a memory. "I'm used to the dark now, Mom," I whispered once more, this time without sadness, without anger, just speaking to myself. The darkness embraced me, but it was no longer frightening. It was just a temporary space where I could breathe, wait, and begin to see the light through my own eyes. After a long pause, I heard the faint signal fade and the call hung up. The screen went dark again, reflecting my face blurred amidst the streaks of streetlight. The rain was still falling, droplets streaming down the glass, looking like lines of unfinished writing. I opened my phone, the cursor blinking in the message box. I typed, "I miss home." I stared at the sentence for a long time until my eyes started to sting. Then, for reasons I couldn't explain, I tapped the delete button. The sentence vanished, as if it had never existed. Only the empty space remained, just like the photo frame I still had hanging in the cafe, waiting for something, but with no one stepping into it. I put the phone down, stood up, and walked to the glass door. The rain had eased. Only the wind was blowing in gusts, making the sign click softly. Outside, the streetlights reflected on the water on the pavement, yellow and flickering. I gently opened the door, and the wind rushed in. The empty frame I had set up on the porch that afternoon was swaying in the wind, rocking amidst the lingering raindrops. The light from inside the cafe shone through its glass, shimmering, faint as the gaze of someone trying to look into themselves. I stepped closer, steadying the frame so it wouldn't fall. The wood was wet, cold, the smell of sea salt clinging to my hands. I gently stroked the edge of the frame, rainwater trickling down my wrist like warm blood. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of life, as if the empty frame was no longer meaningless. It was alive, trembling in the wind, just like me. I stood there, breathing deeply. The air of the city night carried the scent of coffee, smoke, and a trace of the sea, something I thought I had left behind. I placed my hand on my chest, feeling my heartbeat steady, slow but certain. Tomorrow, I'm having a wedding of my own, with myself. I said it softly, neither smiling nor crying, simply a promise. A great gust of wind rose, sweeping across the pavement, making the frame sway harder. Inside it, the light from the city's electric glow shattered into thousands of tiny pieces, uneven fragments of light, each carrying a different shade of yellow. I looked into it, seeing a gentle, true, and slightly sad kind of beauty, like my own life. I closed my eyes, letting the wind pass through my hair, through my clothes. All sounds seemed to recede, leaving only my own breath, merging with the sound of the wind. Perhaps I had lived too long in the light of others, forgetting that I could also shine, however small, however brief. And tonight, in this empty cafe, I knew I was starting something new. Not a journey to find someone else, but a return to myself. I opened my eyes. The empty frame had stopped shaking, resting calmly again. In the condensation-fogged glass, my reflection appeared, not sharp, but real. I saw myself smile. No need for witnesses. No need for anyone to call my name. "Congratulations," I whispered, a smile fleeting as a breath. I carried the frame inside, placed it next to the wall, and gently wiped it with a cloth. Then I sat down, took out my notebook, and wrote a short line. "Tomorrow, I marry my freedom." The pen paused on the last word, the ink blurring into a small, dark smudge. I didn't fix it. It looked perfect in its own imperfection. I closed the notebook and turned off the last light. The final glow in the cafe vanished, leaving only the faint shimmer from the window frame. I looked at it one last time before leaving. The light was weak, but still patiently waiting. Outside, the wind had calmed. The street was wet, the smell of rain blending with the scent of night. I pulled up my jacket and walked away, leaving behind the soft sound of the swinging sign, the slow rhythm of a newly breathed-out beginning. The morning of Allison's wedding, the city sky was cruelly clear. Sunlight streamed through every window pane, bright enough to coat everything in a new layer of glaze. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and turned on the radio. The morning news was interrupted by the sound of wedding music from a radio advertisement. I turned it off. I didn't need to hear any more. Instead of wearing party attire, I pulled the cafe curtains wide open. Light flooded in, illuminating the walls where I had hung my photographs weeks ago. Today, my small exhibition was open. No flowers, no ribbons, no invitations. Just the smell of roasted coffee and the light slanting in from the window. On the glass door, the handwritten sign still bore the scrawled message, "Absent light. Ansang bilang Gwen." I arrived early. Nora hadn't arrived yet. I wanted a moment of silence before people dropped by, if anyone dropped by. I adjusted the position of the frames, quickly wiped away a thin layer of dust, and then stepped back a few paces. It was a small space, but I loved the way the morning light reflected on the walls. It made every photo spring to life with the day's first breath. I chose a simple white top, not the white of a wedding dress, but the white of raw linen, soft and real. My hair was tied back, my canvas shoes worn at the heel. I put on my headphones and played the recording of ocean waves I'd captured that morning in Oregon. The waves lapped gently, distant and steady, like a fragment of memory I carried with me. The sound filled the space around me. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, letting myself fully listen to the sea's murmur. Every sound felt like it was touching my skin, bringing the salty taste, the smell of sand, and the feeling of freedom. Out there, people were probably laughing, champagne glasses raised, the wedding march swelling, cameras flashing incessantly. Allison must have been beautiful. She was always beautiful, especially in the light. Mom must have been smiling, relieved that the family finally had a complete day, unmarred by any shadow. As for me, I had my own light. Guests started to arrive. Not many, a middle-aged couple, 2 students, then a young woman alone. I stood in the corner of the room, my headphones still on. The sound of the waves blended with the sound of shoes on the floor, the gentle clink of coffee cups on saucers. Everyone viewed the photographs in silence. No one spoke. They just walked slowly, their eyes lingering on each frame. Some tilted their heads, some stood for a very long time. Some just offered a slight smile. I didn't approach them. I didn't explain. The first picture they saw was the empty frame by the sea, the light of dawn flickering between the clouds, the water surface still as a mirror. Then came the shot of the dining table in my mother's house, the chairs pushed crookedly, the dishes untouched, as if someone had just left mid-meal. One woman paused at that photo, tilting her head for a long time, then turned to look at me. I pulled out one earpiece, waiting for her to speak, but she just gave a small nod, her eyes glistening. Someone pointed at the photo of the sea blurred with mist, where the shadow of a woman stood blended with the light. "Who took this picture?" he asked. "I did," I replied. "It's beautiful. But why can't you clearly see the person in the photo?" I smiled, because sometimes to see, we have to accept the blur. He nodded, then fell silent. I put my headphone back on. The sound of the waves returned, enveloping all other noise. The voices, the coffee cups, the opening door, all merged, creating a melody I never knew I needed so much. A child tugged at his mother's hand, pointing to the last photo, the one I took of the white frame in the city rain at night. "Mommy, why is there no one in here?" The mother bent down, smiling. "Yes, there is, sweetheart. The person who took it." A chill ran down my spine when I heard that. Then I laughed, very softly. Outside, the midday sun began to slant. In the cafe, streaks of light slid along the walls, passing over the frames, shining onto the guests' faces. I stood still in that space. No need for a microphone, no need for an introduction. The sound of the waves in my headphones subtly changed its rhythm, deeper and longer. I closed my eyes, feeling as if I were staying in a place farther away than the city, farther away than the wedding, happening just a few miles away. A place with only me, the light, and the sea. In the afternoon, the cafe emptied out. Nora left early and I stayed behind, adjusting a few frames that had been crooked by the draft. I pulled a chair near the window and opened my laptop to check for any news about the exhibition. Nothing yet, but instead, social media was flooded with Allison's wedding photos. Every picture was brilliantly bright. Golden sun, white dress, a perfect smile. Allison stood embraced by her mother and husband, surrounded by friends, flowers, champagne. Someone had written the caption, "The most beautiful moment of a complete family." I paused my mouse over that phrase. Complete. A simple word, but carrying an uncomfortable weight. I didn't feel angry, only a cold sensation spreading from my palms to my chest. I scrolled down. There were hundreds of comments, well wishes, heart emojis, compliments about the bride's beauty. Everything was dazzling, everything was bright. I asked myself, if I had been in that frame, where would the light have gone? Would it still be this brilliant, or would it be overexposed, making my face disappear, like in the old photo from years ago? I closed the screen. The light from the window was still slanting in, golden and warm. I looked around the room. The photos on the walls were silent, but I knew they were alive. A smile crossed my lips. I don't need anyone to take the picture. I can capture my own light. I said it softly, like an answer for the whole room. I walked to the small table where I had placed my camera. Next to it, the old wooden frame still stood, slightly tilted. I raised the lens, turning it toward the window. The sky was turning pink, the last rays of sunlight hiding in the clouds like soft threads. I pressed the shutter. Click. The sound rang out, crisp and round, then dissolved into the air. I checked the photo. A corner of the wall, a few reflections from the glass, and the dawn light in my photos. No longer the light of the sea, but the light of the city, changing seasons. That light streamed through the window, shining onto the empty frame nearby, making its glass glow like a salutation. I put the camera down and sat still. In the glass frame, the light subtly flickered, unfixed, both warm and cold, both distant and near. I felt something shift in my heart, like an old wound closing. Outside, car horns sounded in the distance. A gentle breeze blew in, carrying the scent of smoke and sweet pastry. The light on the walls gradually turned a pale orange. I leaned my head back against the chair, relaxing. I didn't know if anyone would look at these photos tomorrow, or if they would remain here in silence. But that no longer mattered. Because I realized what makes a photograph meaningful isn't the person standing in it, but the person who dared to press the shutter. I looked at the empty frame one last time. In the faint reflection, I saw my shadow merging with the light. Not clear, not prominent, but present. And for me, that was enough. I turned off the lights, letting the last light of the day do its work, filtering through the window frame, spilling over the photos, stopping at the empty frame as if choosing a resting place. The light trembled, then slowly settled, like the slow breath of the sea. I closed my eyes, listening to the wave recording in my headphones again. This time, I didn't feel lonely. There was only stillness, wide and deep, like the moment right before the sun rises. Outside, the sky began to darken, but in the small room the light still remained, enough for me to know that I was still watching and still being seen. It was Saturday afternoon, and the cafe was busier than usual. The late-day sunlight slanted through the large glass window, spreading across the floor like thin honey. The smell of roasted coffee and the sound of acoustic music blended, so gently that I almost forgot this was my exhibition. I was wiping the counter when I noticed a middle-aged woman standing for a very long time in front of the photo of me standing near the empty frame. She wore a gray cardigan, her hair streaked with silver, holding a lukewarm cappuccino. The light from the window shining through made her eyes glisten, as if holding back something she didn't want to drop. I approached her, but before I could speak, she whispered, as if talking only to herself, "I was once edited out of my own family picture, too." Her voice trembled slightly, yet it wasn't weak. It carried the resonance of a sadness that had lived so long it had become gentle. I didn't ask why, nor did I try to comfort her. I just stood beside her, looking in the direction of her gaze. In the glass frame was my small figure on the beach, the faint light blurring everything, while the sky opened boundlessly. My daughter said I didn't match them, she continued, her voice low. In her wedding photo, I was standing off to the side, only half my shoulder visible. I thought I was just there to carry the flowers. I looked at her hands, calloused, with chipped nails. This woman, who had likely spent a lifetime caring for others, only to realize one day that she had vanished from every frame. I nodded softly. Maybe some frames forget who started the picture. She turned, offered a small smile, and a tear slid down her cheek. Maybe. She stood for a moment longer, then took a tissue, wiped her face, and quietly said, "Thank you," before leaving. As the door closed, I saw the sunlight stream onto the spot where she had stood, leaving a small bright streak on the floor. I turned back to the photograph. Beneath the frame, the small label I had posted on the first day was still there. Some frames aren't empty, they're waiting. I read the sentence again, this time not to remind myself, but to feel it. They're not empty, they're waiting. Waiting for whom? Perhaps waiting for those who had been forgotten to return, to stand in their rightful place, without asking anyone's permission. I sat down on the chair by the window and pulled out my notebook. Under the title, Absent Light, I added a new line. Maybe it's not the light that forgets us. Maybe we're just learning to face it again. I looked up and saw Nora talking to a young man holding a camera. He wore a white button-down shirt, a leather bracelet, and looked slightly awkward, but his eyes were bright. When our gazes met, he smiled and approached. "Excuse me, are you Clara? I'm writing for the Portland Echo. Could I interview you briefly?" I blinked. I thought only a few people would show up. "Yes," he laughed, "but someone shared your photo online, the one with the empty frame on the beach. The story behind it is spreading faster than you think." I was slightly surprised. Spreading fast? The first article came out this morning, and it already has thousands of shares. It seems people are finding themselves in it. He opened his phone to show me. On the screen was an article by a young reporter, "The Woman Who Married Her Own Light." Below the title was the photo I took that early morning in Oregon, the empty frame, the blurred sea, and the light as thin as a breath. I read a few lines. She didn't wait for anyone to invite her into the picture. She simply walked in, and by doing so, she forced every other woman to look at herself, those who were once erased from the family frame, from memory, from the light. I closed the phone, my hands still slightly trembling, not from fear, but from the feeling that something was starting to move beyond my control. Not a loss of control, but a spreading. The reporter looked at me, his smile gentle. "They're calling it the empty frame movement. You know, sometimes just one photograph is enough to make people want to stand up straight again." I was silent, looking outside. The afternoon light was brilliant, the cafe full of voices, but in my heart, what spread was a profound stillness, deep, warm, and true. The news traveled faster than anything I could have imagined. After just 2 days, the whole country began sharing the story of the woman who married herself. Major newspapers reposted the first article, each with a different headline. "The Woman in the Empty Frame. She said, 'I do' to herself. A quiet revolution in light." My photos, the empty frame between the misty sea and the faint light, appeared everywhere. On social media pages, in blog posts, even in the inspiration section of a women's magazine. One morning, I opened my laptop in the cafe and saw my inbox overflowing with messages. From New York, Denver, Seattle, even Canada. They weren't loud accolades, but small, real, and quiet letters. One person wrote, "Thank you. I was also asked to step out of a family picture because my shirt color didn't match. That photo is still hanging in the living room. I'm not in it, but starting today, I won't feel missing anymore." Another left a short comment under the article. "Thank you for speaking for us." I read that sentence over and over. I didn't know how many people us represented, 10, 100, or 1,000, but those 2 words alone tightened my chest. I didn't know what to do but sit still, hugging my cooling coffee cup, my eyes glued to the screen. The messages continued, one after another. Women of all ages. Some wrote about marriages they were afraid to leave. Some talked about children who no longer spoke to them. Some just sent 3 words. I see me. I stopped there. I see me. I read it aloud softly. The words were simple, but they resonated in my head like the first wave of the morning, steady, distant, yet impactful. Nora walked out from the counter, holding a cleaning cloth. Are you all right? I nodded. Just a lot. She looked at the screen and gave a small smile. They are finding themselves through you. Not everyone can do that. I didn't answer. I just leaned back against the chair, letting my gaze rest on the latest message. I showed your photo to my mother. We didn't talk, but she cried. A feeling of tightness welled up in my throat. I folded the laptop shut, resting my elbows on the table. The small room was the same, the voices, the sound of the espresso machine, the light sliding across the glass. But everything inside me had changed. I turned my chair toward the wall where the photos hung. The midday sun poured in, shining through the glass, leaving shimmering streaks of light on the tiled floor. For the first time, I cried. Not because of the hurt, but because of being seen. Tears streamed down, not from pain, but from lightness. They were warm, slow, and silent. I let them fall, not wiping them away. In those tears was everything. The years of being forgotten, the blurred photos, the times I was told, don't ruin someone else's happiness. But now, each tear was like a tiny, bright frame. Bright because I knew I was still here, and someone, somewhere, was seeing it. Outside, the sound of the wind brushed past the window. A cloud drifted by, changing the color of the light in the cafe. I looked up, looking back at the empty frame hanging in the middle of the wall. In the blurred glass, a face was reflected. No longer faint, no longer misplaced. I took a deep breath. The sound of the waves in the recording resonated softly in my headphones, blending with my own breath. Everything was still, but not silent. A child ran past, drawing a bright line on the wall with its shadow. I laughed quietly. Life was still going on, quietly, but abundantly. I took my notebook, opened a new page, and wrote the final line for the day. They saw me, and for the first time, I see me too. Then I closed it, set the notebook aside, and looked out the window. The afternoon light was falling, warm like someone's hand gently touching my shoulder. And I sat still, in that room full of light, knowing that finally I had stepped into the picture of my own life. Monday morning, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. I had just opened my eyes. Before I even had time to make coffee, the screen flared up with the name Mom. I hesitated for a few seconds, then answered. My mother's voice came through, no longer measured as usual, but slightly trembling, mixed with anger and fear. You are embarrassing the family. Not a greeting, no question about my well-being, just those 5 words, dropping heavily like a stone thrown into the water. I leaned my back against the wall, looking out the window, where the dew-soaked leaves clung to the glass frame. I think, I said slowly, I'm not embarrassing the family. I'm just filling the void you left. On the other end, silence. I could imagine my mother's expression right now, strained, her lips tightly pressed, clutching the phone as if trying to control the fierce wave crashing in from the news online. Filling the void I left, she repeated, her voice choked. You don't know what you're doing, Clara. All our relatives are talking. People are saying I failed as a mother. Do you understand how much that hurts? I smiled faintly. I do, Mom. It's just that I can't keep living to keep a perfect picture for everyone else anymore. I heard her sharp intake of breath, then the line cut off abruptly. The room was silent. I looked at the phone, still lit, reflecting my blurred face. For a moment, I felt like I was talking to the very woman in the old photo frame, the one who believed that if she just kept everything quiet, everyone would be happy. I let the phone drop onto the table, taking a long breath. But before I could calm myself, another message popped up. From Allison. You always have to be the center, as always. No question mark, no greeting, just an accusation. I read it slowly, each word typed out with a cold knife. She must have seen the articles, the photos, where people called me all sorts of names. Icon, brave woman, movement initiator. And she, the beautiful bride of last week, suddenly became a fading shadow on the sidelines. I understood that feeling. I had lived in that shadow my entire life. I held the screen for a few seconds, intending not to reply. But then, a stillness within me spoke. Not angry, not defensive, just clear. I typed slowly. No, this time I'm just choosing not to disappear. I looked at the message before hitting send. 7 words, not many, but containing a lifetime of my silence. I pressed send. Outside, the sky was overcast. A thick cloud passed over, covering the sun, making the room darker. The wind whistled through the door crack like an unending whisper. I got up, poured some water, trying to keep my hand from shaking. Whenever I faced Mom or Allison, I still felt myself shrink, as if I had just stepped into the old kitchen, still afraid of spilling milk or saying the wrong thing. But now, that fear was slowly receding, leaving behind a silent void. I didn't want to win against anyone. I just wanted to stand quietly in my own light, without permission, without apology. Another notification sound. A new message from Allison. Mom cried all night. I hope you're happy. I didn't open it. I sat down on the chair, my eyes focused on the empty frame hanging in the corner of the room. The light from the window shone on the glass surface, cold and pale. I thought of Nora's words from yesterday. No one is used to being seen. You aren't either. Perhaps she was right. Being seen, it sounds easy, but it's a battle too. I placed my hand on the table, my thumb touching the edge of the frame, feeling the smooth, cold wood. The sensation calmed me. A thought flashed. The light isn't at fault when it shines on something people don't want to see. It's just doing its job. I looked up, staring outside. In the sky, the thick cloud had just split, revealing a thin streak of light. Not large, but distinct. And I thought to myself, perhaps no matter what this storm brings, I will still choose to remain in that bright spot. Night fell earlier than usual. The wind lashed against the window panes, carrying a dry, whistling sound and the smell of smoke from the street. I made a cup of tea, intending to work, but when I opened my computer, a wave of comments hit me. On social media, the articles about me had thousands of shares. Just a few hours ago, they were all praise. But now, half of them had turned into attacks. It's fake. She just wants fame. She's exploiting pity. No one marries themselves without needing an audience. It's drama to sell photos. I sat still, reading every line. Some analyzed the way I dressed. Others dug up old photos comparing me to Allison, saying I was jealous. Someone even wrote, if she were truly strong, she would have stayed silent instead of complaining. Every sentence was like a small stone thrown into the water, creating cold ripples that spread through my heart. I scrolled down, seeing an image of myself in another post, my profile, half lit. The author captioned it, "This isn't art. This is self-pity framed." My fingers froze on the keyboard. I wanted to reply, to write that they didn't understand, that I had never tried to grab attention. I only wanted to live authentically. But then I stopped. I remembered what Nora once said. You can't control how others see you, Clara. You can only choose how you see them back. I sighed softly, taking a sip of tea. It was cold and bitter. Outside, the wind grew stronger, making the small sign creak. The light from the street lamp filtered through the curtain, casting thin gray streaks on the wall. In that half-light, I saw myself sitting there, slightly hunched, my eyes empty. I closed the laptop. The dry click sound echoed, and the room plunged into silence. I sat in the darkness, hugging my knees. No more blue screen light, no more notifications, only my own breath and the steady sound of the wind. I closed my eyes, feeling a void spread from my stomach to my chest. A kind of emptiness that wasn't exactly painful, but heavy, as if a large room inside me had just been dismantled and not yet replaced. I wondered, were they right? Was I exploiting my own loneliness to be seen, to prove something? Perhaps in some way, yes. I had desperately wanted to prove I wasn't invisible, and perhaps that act looked like a cry for help. I looked up into the darkness. The room was still as an unexposed film. Everything was just a blur in my mind. Maybe they are right, I whispered, my voice almost lost in the wind. But at least I still exist. The final words came out soft as a breath, yet they resonated in my heart more clearly than any noise outside. I squeezed my hands around my knees, then slowly relaxed. The cold from the wooden floor seeped into my skin, but it also made me lucid. I realized no amount of criticism, no misunderstanding could make me disappear anymore. Not ever again. I stood up and turned on the small desk lamp. The faint yellow light illuminated the wall, shining onto the empty frame in the corner. This time, the light wasn't trembling. It stood still, as if it too was tired of the storm. I approached it, touching the edge of the wood. Cold, smooth, real. The light reflected back, shining onto my hand, and I thought, maybe this is the true meaning of existence. Not to be praised or criticized, but simply to know that you are still here, still able to touch what you believe in. I sat down and wrote a few lines in my notebook. They called me fake. Maybe I am. But faking light still means carrying it. Then I closed the notebook and sighed. Outside, the wind was dying down. A thin streak of light slipped through the gap in the curtain, shining onto the floor like a thread connecting me to the world. I looked at it, feeling a strange peace. The storm had passed, not completely gone, but a little further away. That morning, the sky was clear and cold. The first light of day slanted across the desk where I had left my laptop open all night. I wasn't planning on checking my email, only intended to make coffee. But then, in the list of new messages, one line appeared amidst countless advertisements. The Atlantic Lens. Your frame is everyone's frame. I thought I had misread it. I opened the email. Dear Clara, we've been following the conversation around your work. We believe your story isn't just yours. It belongs to everyone who's ever felt unseen. Would you consider letting us feature it? I sat motionless. The black letters against the white background seemed brighter than the sun outside. My hand rested on the mouse, unable to move. Your frame is everyone's frame. The phrase repeated in my head, like the sound of a wave touching the shore. I read it a second time, then a third. Each time my eyes blurred a little more. By the fourth reading, tears were falling onto the keyboard, soaking into the gaps between the keys like late rain. It wasn't just happiness. It was because I never thought that one day, someone, a complete stranger, would see me so clearly. I smiled faintly, trying to wipe the tears with my sleeve, but the more I wiped, the more they fell. I remembered the nights I took photographs alone, in the wind, in the rain, in the silence of a world that didn't need my presence. And now, someone, somewhere, was saying that story belonged to everyone. I took a deep breath, leaning back in the chair. The clock ticked on the wall, slow and steady. The light on the desk had changed color, from yellow to white. I left the email on the screen, not replying, just wanting to look at it a little longer, as proof that sometimes all it takes is one true gaze for a lifetime of silence to be heard. I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked over to the empty frame still hanging next to the window. The morning light poured onto the glass surface, reflecting my face blurred in the morning mist. I touched the frame, whispering, "Looks like someone finally saw it." The wind gently moved the curtain, as if responding. In that moment, I didn't want to share this with the world. I just wanted to hear a familiar voice. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts. The cursor stopped at the name Dad. I hesitated for a second, then pressed call. The line rang, each chime feeling like a slow heartbeat. I almost hung up when his voice came through, deep, warm, and slightly hoarse with age. "Clara?" "Yes, it's me." The silence that followed was long, with only the sound of breathing from both ends of the line. "Are you all right?" he asked. I swallowed. "Yes, I just wanted to hear your voice." I didn't mention the email, not the magazine, nor the articles, nor the online storm. I just wanted to hear his voice. The voice of the man who never took sides, the one who always stood outside every argument, and because of that, I knew he was the only safe place. He chuckled softly. "You haven't called in a while." "I know. Is your morning coffee still as bitter as usual?" "A little more bitter, actually." We laughed together, a short, peaceful burst of laughter, then silence again. But it was the most comfortable silence I had ever known. I leaned back against the wall, looking out the window. The sun was high now, the light shattering across the room, shining on the desk, the floor, the old photo frame. In that light, everything looked so clear. "Dad," I said softly, "did you ever feel invisible?" He paused thoughtfully. "I think sometimes a person has to disappear to understand where they used to be." I pressed my lips together, tears welling up again. He didn't ask why I was crying, just added, gentle as the wind, "No matter where you stand, the light will find you. I believe that." I smiled through the tears. "Thank you, Dad." "No need for thanks," he replied. "Just don't let yourself go out." The line was silent. I heard him cough softly, and then the call ended. I looked at the phone, my heart filled with a rare warmth, the kind I thought I had lost with the old family picture. I still held the phone in my hand, even after the call ended. The words "call ended" lit up on the screen and then faded, leaving my reflection, blurred, faint, but real. I sat down, hesitated, and then called again. This time he answered almost immediately. "Still there?" he said, a husky chuckle in his voice. I took a slight breath. "You must be disappointed in me." On the other end, a long silence. I heard the wind whisper through the receiver, then his breath. "No," he replied slowly, his voice warm and steady as waves hitting rock. "I was just afraid you had to bear it alone." That sentence stunned me into silence. Of all the things I had ever heard, none was so soft, yet so profound. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't judgmental. It simply touched the exact spot I hadn't expected. the spot I thought had long gone numb. I rested my chin on my knees, watching the light from the window stream onto the wall. I'm used to it, I said softly, half smile, half sigh. I was used to sitting alone in the cafe after closing, used to the only sound being the cold coffee dripping, used to no one asking, "Are you okay?" but only, "How far have you gotten?" I was used to wiping away my own tears before anyone could see, but when I spoke that sentence, I heard my voice sound different. No more bitterness, only naked truth, and in that nakedness, there was a sense of peace. "Don't get too used to it, sweetheart," he said. "People can be strong, but no one should be alone forever." I smiled faintly. "You still call me sweetheart?" "You'll always be my daughter." His voice faded, then broke, as if he was trying to keep his composure. "I just wanted to say, no matter what life you choose, I'm still here. Not loud, not interfering, just here." I bit my lip, holding back a sob. "I know." Then we were silent. Nothing more was needed. A light silence, free of distance. It was as full as the sound of waves touching the shore, unspoken, yet fully understood. When the call ended, I placed the phone on the table. The screen hadn't completely gone dark, its faint blue light shone on my face. In the blue screen light, my face was clear, calm, grown up. It wasn't the face of a woman winning or losing, but the face of someone who had finally stopped needing validation. I looked for a long time, as if meeting an old acquaintance, my own self at 33. The person who was once so afraid of being forgotten that she had to vanish to be remembered. It was different now. The light in the room was no longer something I had to use to prove anything. It was just there, shining on the desk, on the frame, on my hands that still bore faint traces of dried tears. I closed the laptop, not rushing to reply to the email. I wanted to keep this silence a little longer, before the outside world rushed in. The screen light slowly went out, but the true light in the room remained, thin, soft, and alive. I stood up and walked to the window. The city below was still noisy, but viewed from here it was just a patchwork of light, soft and blurry like a breath. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, feeling my heart slow down, steady. In my mind, my father's sentence still echoed. "I was just afraid you had to bear it alone." I smiled gently. "Not anymore," I whispered. I no longer saw my shadow alone in the empty frame. Now, the light had poured in, not too bright, not needing permission, just enough to clearly see that I was truly alive. I had no idea Dad was coming. That morning, the cafe had just opened. The dew was still clinging to the glass, and Nora was arranging some dried lavender into a ceramic vase. I was wiping the counter when I heard the door open, the small bell above the frame jingling softly. I looked up. Dad was standing there, holding a slightly trembling cup of coffee. He was still wearing the same old gray wool jacket, his collar slightly crooked, his frame thinner than I remembered. His hair had much more silver in it, and the light shining through made it look like smoke wisps. "Dad?" I called, unable to hide my surprise. He smiled, a slow, gentle smile, just as it had been for years. I thought, it was time I saw what you've done with my own eyes. I stepped out from behind the counter, still holding the cleaning rag. Neither of us said anything more. Nora gave him a quiet nod of greeting and then silently withdrew into the back, leaving the space for just the two of us. Dad walked slowly around the cafe. His eyes skimmed over each photograph, each small note underneath. He didn't comment, didn't ask questions. He just stood and looked for a long time, as if trying to hear something from within the frame. When he stopped, I knew immediately it was the photo of Clara in the empty frame, the one taken on the misty Oregon beach at dawn. I was tiny in the picture, standing between the old wooden frame and the still ocean surface, the horizon nearly gone. The light slanted in from the window onto the photo, making the figure in the frame seem to step out, half real, half illusion. Dad looked for a long time, his hands trembling slightly, the coffee in the cup rippling. I stood behind him, not daring to speak. Something in his posture, the slight slump of his shoulders, the way his eyes fixed on the frame, made me understand he was wrestling with himself. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse and very quiet. "You were like your mother, only you dare to stand in the light." The sentence fell as lightly as dust, yet it took my breath away for a moment. I bit my lip, holding back tears. "I'm like Mom?" I asked, my voice shaky. He nodded, not looking at me, his eyes still on the photograph. "She used to love the light too, but she always stood behind the lens. I think that was her way of protecting herself. You were different. You stepped into it, even though you knew the light would expose things you weren't ready for." I stayed silent. The espresso machine in the cafe hummed softly in the background, blending with the gentle jazz music. But in my head, there was only my father's voice, deep, slow, and true. I remembered my childhood days, how Dad was always the one who sat quietly while Mom taught me how to arrange photo frames in the living room. He never said beautiful or not beautiful. He just watched silently, then adjusted a crooked frame. Back then, I thought he didn't care. Now I understand. Perhaps he was just afraid his words would disrupt the fragile order of that house. "Are you angry with me?" I asked, my voice small. He shook his head. "Angry? No. Just regretful that I was silent for too long." The light in the cafe changed color as a cloud passed, casting faint streaks of light onto his face. I looked at him, seeing the dark circles under his eyes, the calloused hands, the marks of a man who had spent his life trying to keep everything steady, forgetting how to express love. I stepped closer and put my hand on his shoulder. For the first time in years, he didn't flinch. Both of us stood there, before the photograph, needing no more words. The light from the street shone through the glass, hitting the frame, then casting onto my father's face, just enough for me to notice a very small smile, trembling but genuine. In that moment, I realized this silent man was also learning how to step into his own light, in a slow, gentle but resolute way. We stood still for quite a while, hearing only the faint sound of a spoon hitting a cup from the far corner of the cafe. The midday light gradually slanted, gliding across the wooden floor and onto the photo frame. I knew something was still unspoken between Dad and me, a small sound, trapped between years of silence. I took a deep breath and then asked, "Why were you silent when they pushed me out?" The question slipped out light as a breath, yet it contained the long winter I had endured. Dad didn't answer immediately. He leaned back slightly, his eyes still on the picture on the wall. I saw his shoulder tremble slightly, his hand clenching the coffee cup, then releasing. The steam rose, thin as mist dissolving on the sea. "Because," his voice caught, short and dry. He took a very deep breath, as if gathering all his courage to speak out. "Because I thought silence would keep the peace, but it only kept the pain." He lowered his head, his hands clasped together. "I thought if I said nothing, everyone would stop hurting each other. But it turned out, when I was quiet, you bore it all." I looked at him, my throat tightening. I had always thought Dad was indifferent, thought he chose Mom's side because it was easier. But now, all I saw was a man carrying a lifetime of regret in his eyes. "I didn't know what to say when you left home," he continued, his voice low. It was too late, and now, I just want you to know, I see you, truly see you. I bit my lip. All words of forgiveness suddenly seemed redundant. Just that sentence alone, like light piercing through the fog, faint but warm. I nodded gently, saying no more. He smiled, nodded back, then looked around the cafe, as if memorizing every detail. "This place is beautiful," he said. "Warmer than our old house," I replied, perhaps because it was built with silence that learned how to speak. He laughed, a husky but genuine laugh. Then he placed the coffee cup on the table and slowly put on his coat. "I have to go," he said. "Your mother will worry if I'm late." I walked him to the door. Before leaving, he turned back, the light casting onto half his face, gray and warm like a late winter afternoon. "Clara," he said, "don't let silence kill you the way it almost killed me." I didn't have time to reply. The door closed gently, the wind chime jingling. He walked slowly, his figure shrinking amidst the sun-filled street. I stood there, watching until his shadow merged into the crowd. When I turned back, I saw the receipt he had left on the table. Among the printed numbers, there was a scrawled, handwritten note. "I'm proud of you." Just 4 words, but enough to make me break down in tears. Tears fell onto the paper, blurring the ink. I gently smoothed it, afraid the handwriting would dissolve. In that moment, all the anger, all the distance between him and me, melted away like mist in the sun. I folded the note and put it in my wallet, where I used to keep the old shattered film. Then I looked around the room, the light still slanting, projecting the empty frame's shadow onto the wall. But this time, I saw Dad, Mom, and myself in it. 3 figures, though distant, still learning how to stand together in the same frame of light. I smiled, not because anything was fixed, but because finally I understood. Sometimes, a late word can still save a silent life. One autumn morning, with the mist still clinging to the window pane, Nora opened the cafe door and called out loudly, "Clara, turn on the TV! They're talking about you!" I walked out, my hands still stained with ink from the previous evening. On the small screen, mounted in the corner of the wall, the Atlantic Lens logo appeared, followed by the text, "The empty frame movement. When an empty photo stirs the world." The reporter spoke in a deep, clear voice. "The story of photographer Clara Reed is not just art. It is a voice for those who were once erased from their own life's frame." The image appeared, the wooden frame on the beach, me in my gray jacket, my hair blowing back in the wind. The shot was slow motion, the light of dawn filling the screen. In the corner, a caption ran, "She photographed absence and made the world see presence." I held my breath, not out of pride, but out of disbelief that I was truly being seen, not through a camera lens, but through the eyes of the entire world. Beside me, Nora smiled gently. "You've opened a door, Clara." I sat down, silent. When the program switched to the audience interview segment, I saw the faces of women from various places. A silver-haired mother holding a family photograph, a young girl with a camera in her hand, a widow standing in front of a white wall where her husband used to hang his paintings. They all said the same thing. I was once edited out of my own family picture. Their voices trembled, but their eyes were bright. I couldn't stop the tears. What was once my private loneliness had now transformed into a bridge connecting thousands of other souls. When the screen changed scenes, I saw a printed poster with a small inscription hung in a temporary exhibition room in Seattle. "Some frames aren't empty. They're waiting. I gently touched that sentence on the screen, as if reaching out to the very people reading it. The words I had once scrawled on a small piece of paper during the loneliest night of my life were now hanging on white walls where hundreds of people stood gazing. It was no longer a personal comfort, but a promise to everyone who had ever been forgotten. After the broadcast, my inbox began to explode. Messages, letters, emails, comments, coming from everywhere. A teacher wrote, "I always stood behind the camera, thinking I wasn't pretty enough to be photographed. Thank you for helping me understand. Beauty is daring to be present." A single mother in New York sent a photo with her daughter, along with the note, "The first picture I allowed myself to be in." A woman in Ireland handwritten a long letter, the paper yellowed, the script slanting. "I am 68 years old. Today, I took my first self-portrait." I read every line, shedding tears. Not tears of sadness, but the emotion of someone who had just realized she was no longer alone. I whispered, as if talking to those distant people, "We are all in the frame, just under different lights." My light was the Oregon Sea. Theirs was the kitchen, the classroom, the small attic, where there was an empty chair or a slightly drawn curtain. But they all shared one thing: we had stopped standing outside our own picture. I wiped my tears and opened my camera. On the screen, the morning light shone back, almost whiting out my face. I took the picture. Click. Once again, I saw myself in the frame, not because I needed to be seen, but because I knew I was here. Outside the window, the wind rustled the old sign. Light poured in, reflecting onto the glass frame. I thought, perhaps, sometimes all it takes is one person daring to tell their story for the whole world to start listening. In the evening, I sat in my small room, the faint yellow light casting onto the wall where the postcards sent by people were hung. Dozens of letters, each a slice of someone's life, a cramped kitchen corner, a window overlooking the street, or a pair of old hands clasped together. I opened each one, reading every line. Amidst the pile of letters, a pale blue envelope stood out. The handwriting was scrawled, naive. "Dear Miss Reed, I saw your pictures on YouTube. You made me believe I'm enough." Below was a machine translation in Vietnamese. "Cô làm em tin là em đủ tốt." I paused for a long time, not because the words were eloquent, but because they came from someone I had never met, a high school student, perhaps sitting in a dorm room, amidst a world full of noise, yet finding enough quiet to write this down. I folded the letter, my hands trembling slightly. Something welled up in my heart, warm yet deep and quiet, like the light after the rain stops. I placed the letter on the table next to the cold tea. For a moment, I thought of my 10-year younger self, the girl who held a camera but dared not photograph her own face, fearing no one would want to look. Now, someone, somewhere else, was looking at my photo to find themselves. Clara realized she was no longer alone. Not just because thousands of people were sharing, but because each of those individuals was raising a part of my voice, but in their own way, in their own light. I opened my laptop and revisited the empty frame movement page. The notification popped up. Over 2 million views. Below, comments continued to pour in. Not loud, not arguing, just short, genuine sentences. The first time I saw myself in an imperfect story. Your photo is like a door I never dared to open. I don't need to be praised, I just need to be seen. Thank you. I read, and each line felt like a shared breath. The whole world seemed to be breathing in unison with me. On the screen, the video replayed the interview segment. They used the sound of waves as background, overlaying my voice clipped from an old recording. Not everyone is invited into the frame, but everyone has the right to create their own frame. The sound of the waves in the video, combined with my voice, echoed across social media. It wasn't loud, it wasn't fierce, It was just the gentle, steady sound of the sea, like the ocean's heartbeat. I sat quietly, looking at the bright screen in the dark room, my face reflected on the glass, merging with the image of the sea behind. It felt as if I was standing there, with strangers I had never met, listening to my own voice with them, sharing the same rhythm of the waves. I thought, perhaps this is the new definition of family, not the people we were born with, but the people who hear us and who stay after the silence. I placed my hand on my chest, feeling my heart rate merge with the sound of the waves through the speaker. In that moment, I no longer felt the distance between myself and the world. There was only the sound of water, of breath, of existence. I whispered, not for anyone to hear, just letting the words dissolve into the air. Thank you for being here. Outside, the wind blew past the window. A ray of light from the street lamp shone into the room, touching the photo frame near the desk. The light danced gently, like waves touching the shore, just enough to remind me that there are still people out there, seeing each other, in the same frame of light, no matter how far apart. It was raining lightly in the afternoon. Water droplets on the window panes streamed down in long streaks, the streetlights reflecting off them like silver threads. I was putting away the frames when I heard a knock on the door. Slow, hesitant, as if the person outside was checking to see if I was home. I opened the door. Allison stood there, her long coat damp, her wet hair sticking to her cheek. In her hand was a magazine featuring my photo, the shot taken at the exhibition. Me standing before the empty frame, the light slanting across my face, half lit, half shadow. She paused, her voice faltering. I didn't know you were hurting so badly. I looked at my sister for a long time. So many years had passed since she last stood at my door, yet in my eyes, Allison was still the girl Mom always called the pride of the family. Today, the light from the hallway reflected on her face, no longer brilliant as on her wedding day, but pale, tired, and real. I stepped aside. Come in. She entered, her eyes sweeping over the small apartment. On the table, there were still a few unwashed teacups, and the morning newspaper I hadn't finished reading. The air between us was thick, like steam in a closed room. Allison placed the magazine on the table, lightly touching the cover. I read this article 3 times, she said, and each time I felt a lump in my throat. I didn't answer, just sat down opposite her, pouring her a warm cup of tea. She looked at me, her eyes moist. Why didn't you say anything? Why did you let things go this far? I smiled, a slow, weary smile. Do you think Mom would have listened if I had spoken? She fell silent. We both knew the answer. In that house, only one person was allowed to speak. The rest were only allowed to listen. I continued, soft as a breath. No one knew, because I learned to hide my pain just to be accepted. Allison looked up, her eyes wide. I saw shock there, mixed with regret. She tried to say something, but her lips only trembled, then closed. I looked out the window where the rain was still falling steadily. Do you remember, I said, the day Mom made me take the family photo, but told me to stand a little further back so the light would be even? Back then I thought I was helping to make the picture better. Only later did I understand I was actually being pushed out of the frame. Allison lowered her head, her voice hoarse. Sister, I didn't know it made you feel so small. It's okay, I said. I also didn't know what made you feel you had to be so perfect you didn't dare to breathe. She looked up, her eyes glistening. I saw myself reflected there, the same wound, only a different shape. One forgotten, one forced to shine, both exhausted. No one spoke anymore. I stood up, went to get a dry towel and handed it to her. Allison gave a faint smile, folding the towel neatly. I think the article got one thing right. she said softly. They called you the woman who walked into the light. I think you did something I never would have dared to do. I sat back down, my hand touching the edge of the magazine on the table. My photo was spread across 2 pages with a caption beneath. She turned invisibility into art and silence into light. I read it again, then looked up at my sister. No, Allison, I said. I didn't walk into the light. The light only found me when I stopped trying to please someone else. Outside, the rain fell harder, the wind whistling through the door crack like a long sigh. In the small room, the 2 sisters sat opposite each other. Between them, the open magazine and the cooling tea, the only warmth left in the cold afternoon. The room settled into a long silence. The rain outside had eased, leaving only the sound of water dripping rhythmically from the gutter onto the cement. Allison rotated the teacup in her hands, her gaze distant. After a while, she whispered, barely looking at me, I'm in therapy too, because I'm afraid of failing Mom. I looked up. Her voice was small but so real it made me halt. The doctor said, she continued, I was taught from a young age that I had to be perfect, always the best, for Mom to be proud. I don't know how to live if I'm not the perfect daughter. I'm so tired, sis. Every time I make a mistake, I hear Mom's voice in my head, not mine. She let out a choked laugh. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? I didn't answer. I only saw her shoulders slump, shrinking as if wanting to vanish from her own body. A part of me ached because I recognized that very image of myself years ago. I slowly reached out and took her hand. It's not crazy, I said, my voice low. We were both swallowed by the same thing, the silence. Allison looked up, her eyes wet. I saw my own face reflected there, the sister who had been silent to be loved, and the sister who had talked too much not to be forgotten. Both were trapped between expectation and fear. I squeezed her hand gently, letting the warmth pass between us. You know, I whispered, I used to think strength meant not crying, but now I understand. Strength is daring to say you're hurting. Allison nodded softly. A tear rolled down her cheek, but this time she didn't wipe it away. We sat quietly like that, only hearing the rain gradually fading outside the window frame. The late afternoon light slipped through the clouds, golden and soft as honey, shining slantwise into the room. I pulled the curtain aside, letting the light shine directly onto us both. It illuminated the tear streaks on her face, then shone onto me, the 2 bright streaks merging into one. I think, I said slowly, Mom was also swallowed by the same thing. She was silent so she wouldn't lose control. You were silent so you wouldn't be criticized. And I was silent so I wouldn't be abandoned. In the end, no one could hear anyone. Allison nodded, her lips trembling. I'm afraid Mom will never understand. Maybe not, I replied, but at least now we understand each other. In that moment, there was no need for apologies, no need for explanations. There were just 2 people learning to look at each other without any layer of defense. Allison put the teacup down, stood up, and slowly walked toward me. I stood up. Without words, we hugged. The embrace wasn't tight, not dramatic, but real, as if after all these years, our bodies finally remembered how to return to a familiar warmth. I felt the rhythm of her heart, fast and soft, merging with my own breathing. The golden afternoon light fell onto our 2 heads. It passed through the window, resting on our shoulders, glittering like bright dust motes. I closed my eyes, resting my chin on her shoulder. In that moment, I no longer saw the boundary between sister and sister, between the forgotten and the remembered. There were just 2 women, both weary, both learning to forgive, both standing in the same frame of light. Outside, the rain had stopped. The last sunlight of the day shone onto the street, reflecting into the room like a large mirror. I saw our two figures in it, small but clear, warm as the first time we truly shared a presence, and I thought, perhaps this is the most beautiful photograph of my life. No frame needed, no camera required, only light and truth. Saturday morning, the room behind Nora's cafe was flooded with sunlight. The rays passed through the thin curtain, drawing long streaks across the wooden floor. I rearranged the chairs, adjusted the angle of the frames, and placed 10 empty frames on the table, each bearing a swipe of paint, each holding an untold story. This was the first session of the community photography class I had started, not to teach technique, but to help them see themselves again. 12 women arrived. Some were silver-haired, some wore office attire, some still had flour dusted on their aprons. They were all timid, huddled like elementary school students on their first day. I smiled gently, walking around the room, handing each person a wooden frame. "No camera needed today," I said. "Just this frame. We're going to talk about what has never been photographed." They looked at each other, then at me. The light shone on their faces, the wrinkles, the dark circles, the faint laugh lines. Everything they usually tried to hide when taking a photo. A gray-haired woman raised her hand first, her voice trembling. I never dared to photograph myself, because every time I saw that face, I only saw mistakes, a failed marriage, children far away, wasted years. The room fell silent. No one laughed, no one avoided her gaze. Then another spoke up, softly, as if afraid to break the atmosphere. "Mine is the opposite. I photograph myself too much, as if without a picture I will disappear. But each photo makes me feel more like a stranger to myself." I nodded, letting them continue. Each person, each voice, their stories were different, but the root was the same. They once believed that only when they were perfect did they deserve to be seen. I stood in the center of the room, my hand resting on an empty frame. The light slanted through it, shining directly onto the frame, casting a bright rectangle onto the wall like an open door. I looked around and spoke slowly, letting each word land where it needed to land. It's not that the camera doesn't like us. It's that we haven't allowed ourselves to be present. The room went completely silent. Some looked down, some teared up, some gave a faint smile as if they had just understood something deeper than a photograph, deeper than a lens. I walked over to the gray-haired woman, took her frame, and held it right in front of her face. "Try looking through this," I said. "No need to take a picture, just look. Who is in there?" She hesitated, then lowered her head and looked into the empty space. A tear fell onto the glass. "It's me," she said, softly as if afraid to break the word. I smiled, and that is enough. I turned to the rest of the group. "There is no single template for beauty," I said, "because the light is always changing, and everyone has their own light. We just have to be brave enough to open the door for it to come in." The morning sunlight shone brighter then, penetrating the curtain, painting the air with glittering specks of dust. I looked around the room. The space that was once my private photo studio was now filled with empty frames, being filled by the gazes of women learning to see themselves again. Something blossomed in my heart, light, warm, and clear as the first dawn after a storm. The atmosphere in the class gradually changed. The initial shyness gave way to small smiles, genuine and soft as late autumn sun. One participant tried to frame and photograph her neighbor. A click sound rang out, and they both burst into laughter when the image appeared on the phone screen. Their faces were half covered by light, the other half glowing golden, as if the sunshine were playing with them. The laughter spread through the classroom, the light reflecting on the lenses. The glass frames cast shimmering lights onto the walls, on the cheeks, on the hair of each person. Every streak of light moved, sparkling like tiny butterflies released after a long winter. Nora stood outside the door, leaning her shoulder against the wooden frame, quietly watching the scene. I turned to her, and we just smiled at each other. Without needing words, we both knew. This was no longer a photography class. It was a healing session. A young woman, around 30, with neatly tied hair, turned to ask me. Her voice was clear and sincere. "Do you have any regrets?" The question caused the whole class to pause. The light in the room seemed to soften too, leaving only the sound of the wind slipping through the curtain. I looked at her, then around the room, the faces waiting for an answer. Each of them had a regret of their own. I took a breath, gently placing my hand on the empty frame in front of me. "No," I said, my voice slow and clear. "My only regret is that I waited too long to see myself." The room held its breath in silence. A quiet moment, then someone chuckled softly, followed by a collective sigh, as if someone had just lifted a brick from their chest. I continued, my gaze sweeping over each person. We often think time will bring peace, but it won't. Peace only comes when we stop hiding from ourselves. The sooner we dare to look back, the sooner we realize we are still there, more whole than we thought. An older woman raised her hand, softly saying, "I think I will start over too. Not for anyone else, just for me." I smiled. That is the most beautiful thing a person can do for themselves. The light outside changed color. The golden morning gradually shifted to an amber afternoon. The slanted sunlight streamed through the window, painting soft, long streaks on the wall like threads. I picked up my camera and took a shot, unplanned, unposed, simply recording the moment these women were laughing, in the same frame, under the same light. The photo appeared on the screen. 12 faces, imperfect, uneven, but radiant in their own way. Every pair of eyes reflected the same thing. They had stopped being afraid. I looked at the picture and knew this was the family portrait I had always longed for. No need for blood ties, only a shared existence in the same light. Outside, the sun fell softly onto the street. In the room, the laughter continued, not loud, just enough to drown out the silence that had once weighed heavily in each heart. I turned off the camera, but the light remained, lingering on their faces and within my heart. And for the first time I realized I wasn't teaching them how to photograph, but they were teaching me how to be seen, once again, in the very light I had once feared. The coastal road was just as I remembered it, long, winding, and fragrant with the mix of salt and pine resin. I slowed the car as the house appeared behind the trees. The roof tiles were gray, the railing rusty, and the paint was peeling in patches. Only the sound of the waves remained unchanged, as if this place had never stopped breathing. I had returned to the house by the sea. 3 years had passed and much had changed, yet that same window still opened towards the wind, where the afternoon light illuminated every dust particle suspended in the air. I stepped inside, my shoes leaving a damp streak on the old wooden floor. The old empty frame still hung there. It was in the middle of the living room, exactly where my mother had meticulously cleaned it, waiting for Allison's wedding photo. Time had faded the wood, the grains now more prominent, like wrinkles on the hand. The glass surface had a few small scratches, but was still clear, still seemingly waiting. Mom was sitting in her old leather armchair near the window, the chair where she always read the newspaper every morning. Now, the paper was folded in her lap, her hands resting one over the other, still. She watched, silently. There was no longer the stern look, no longer the posture of someone who commanded the light to shine her way. There was only an aging mother. Her eyes clouded by age, but still lighting up when she saw her daughter walk in. I didn't say anything. The wall clock ticked rhythmically, a reminder that all words are late. But perhaps this time, silence was the only thing that felt right enough. She slowly nodded, her lips slightly moving, but no words came out. I understood. There are things that cannot be said, only communicated through a gaze. I put my bag down, unzipped it, and took out the sunrise photo, wrapped in tissue paper. I had taken that picture on the Oregon coast, the morning the class ended. The light in the photo wasn't brilliant, just a pale pink streak spreading across the tranquil water. No people, no shadows, only the light, the very thing I had spent my life searching for. I walked toward the wall where the empty frame hung, gently removing the dusty glass cover. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was because my heart was beating to a new rhythm, not fast, not urgent, but certain. Then I placed the sunrise photograph into the frame. The sound of the glass closing was soft as a sigh. The light from the window slanted in, touching the picture, making the sea surface in the photo glow, as if it were truly moving. Mom was still watching, saying nothing. I didn't either. The room was bathed in a pale yellow light, both old and new, both nostalgic and forgiving. I sat down in the chair opposite her. After a long moment, Mom asked, her voice hoarse and soft, "Where is that ocean?" I replied, "It doesn't matter anymore. Anywhere will do, as long as there is light." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the photograph. A small tear rolled down her cheek, slow and quiet. I didn't wipe it away. Outside, the waves lapped gently, steady and rhythmic, like an old heartbeat. In the room, the light kept changing, sometimes bright, sometimes subdued, but never leaving. I knew, somehow, that this frame was finally filled, not by a wedding photo, but by the very thing Mom and I had both been seeking our whole lives: presence. I looked at the photograph, a strange feeling welling up, not victory, nor an ending, just a simple serenity, like a breath returning to its correct rhythm after years of gasping. She looked up at me, the light reflecting in her clouded eyes. She didn't say, "I'm sorry," and I didn't say, "I forgive you," but between us, the void had vanished. The sea wind blew through the open window, carrying the scent of salt and the steady crash of waves against the rocks. Mom still sat in her chair, and I stood next to the wall where the new photo was hung. A moment later, Allison appeared at the doorway, holding a small bouquet of flowers. She stopped short when she saw the photograph on the wall. "Is that the sunrise in Oregon?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, the first picture I took when I wasn't afraid of the light anymore." Mom looked at the two of us, her eyes shining with an emotion difficult to name. No tears, no dramatic apologies. Just 3 women, 3 generations, 3 breaths, standing in the same space, no one avoiding the other for the first time. The afternoon light slanted further, streaming through the window, shining directly onto the frame. From the glass surface it reflected all 3 faces: Mom, my sister, and me. 3 faces in the same frame, imperfect, uneven, but all illuminated. I saw Mom's wrinkles merge with Allison's eyes, and my own features, the ones that had vanished from every family photo all those years ago, now clearly present between them. The room became so quiet that I could distinctly hear the clock ticking and the distant sound of the waves. I took a long breath, feeling my chest open, light as the first morning after a storm. I turned to Mom and Allison. My voice was slightly shaky but firm. "I am here now. No one answered, but Mom pressed her lips together and Allison nodded gently. Mom reached out, touching the edge of the frame, her fingertip trembling. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "The light in here is warmer than I thought." I smiled, because this time it's not just the light. It's us. The sentence echoed in the air, small but complete. Allison let out a soft laugh, the sound dissolving into the sunlight. Mom leaned back in her chair, her eyes half closed. The house suddenly felt strangely warm, not from the temperature, but from the human presence, from the quiet after so many years of the wind blowing through without finding anyone home. I walked over to the window, looking out. The afternoon sea stretched out, the water surface reflecting silver streaks. The waves crashed steadily, rhythmically, unhurried. I closed my eyes, listening intently. For the first time, that sound no longer echoed as a solitary lament. It wasn't the sound of loss or emptiness or yearning. It was the sound of life, the heartbeat of freedom. The wind brushed through my hair, light as someone's touch. I thought about the years gone by, the meals where no one looked into each other's eyes, the empty frame, the light that once terrified me. All of it seemed to wash away, leaving a peaceful void where only I remained. No need to be understood, only the need to be myself. I turned back to look at them again. Mom was still sitting there. Allison stood beside her, both silent in a new kind of peace. The light from the photo frame shone onto their faces, highlighting their most genuine features, aged, weary, but full of kindness. I smiled. Not the smile of a victor, but the smile of someone who had finally come home. Offshore, the sun was setting. The light slowly receded from the walls, but inside the glass frame, the sunrise in the photo still glowed, as if it would never fade. I touched the wooden frame, quietly saying, not directed at anyone, "Thank you for allowing me to see myself." Then I stood there, listening to the waves, listening to the wind, listening to my heart opening up. There was no void left, only light and presence. I stood before the photograph now hung on the wall, looking at the light reflecting on the glass. The light of the sunrise, of my mother, of my sister, and of myself. I thought, perhaps every one of us has been erased from a frame somewhere. Sometimes a family picture, sometimes the picture of our own life. But if you are listening to this story today, I want you to know this. You deserve to be seen. Not when you are perfect, but when you dare to be present, with all your flaws, your silences, and your very own light. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment and tell me where in your life's frame you felt forgotten. And if you want to join me on this journey of women reclaiming their light, please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next stories. Because somewhere, deep within all of us, there is still an empty frame waiting to be filled with the light that is uniquely our own.